When Michael Jordan answered his phone that summer afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the immaculate greens of his private golf course, he had no idea the call would shatter the gilded tranquility of his retirement. His niece, Angela, was on the line, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. The news she delivered was a physical blow, a stunning, incomprehensible dissonance. Dolores Jordan, his mother, the matriarch of the Jordan clan, had been evicted from her home. At 93 years old, she was living in a roadside motel. The basketball legend, a global icon whose net worth was counted in the billions, felt the world tilt on its axis. His mother, evicted. The words were a cruel joke, an impossible paradox. How could his own mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, be adrift in a world of transient uncertainty, while he lived in a palace built on the foundations of her belief in him? Why hadn't she called? Why was he hearing this from his niece? The truth, as it would unfold, was far more complex and heartbreaking than a simple case of financial misfortune. What began as a son's frantic desire to right a terrible wrong would unravel a tapestry of family secrets, heal wounds that had festered for decades in the shadow of his fame, and ultimately forge a legacy far more meaningful than any championship ring. Michael Jordan, the man who had conquered the world of sports and business, was about to face his most profound challenge yet, rebuilding the sacred bond with the woman who gave him life, a bond he had unknowingly allowed to fray. This is the story of what happens when the world's most famous athlete is forced to confront what truly matters, and how one family's crisis became the catalyst for his most significant victory. The Carolina summer heat hung thick and heavy over Michael Jordan's sprawling estate in the lush highlands of Cornelius, North Carolina. Massive oak trees, silent witnesses to generations, cast long, languid shadows across the manicured lawn as the late afternoon sun painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft pink. Michael stood on the expansive stone balcony of his home, a custom-built fortress of solitude overlooking the serene expanse of Lake Norman. A heavy crystal glass, holding 2 fingers of aged whiskey, rested in his hand. At 62, retirement suited him. His business empire, a global colossus, thrived on its own momentum. His Charlotte Hornets basketball team was finally showing the competitive spark he'd been trying to ignite for years. He had time now for the simple pleasures he'd sacrificed at the altar of greatness: a round of golf at dawn, a quiet evening with his wife, the unhurried passage of days, the familiar, insistent chime of his private phone line, a sound reserved for family and his innermost circle, sliced through the peaceful moment. Michael glanced at the screen. Angela, his eldest brother, Larry's daughter. They weren't exceptionally close. The vast constellation of the Jordan family had its own orbits and gravities, but family was family. Angela, Michael answered, his deep voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the sudden, inexplicable unease that pricked at him. Been a while. Uncle Michael, Angela replied, her voice strained, unusually hesitant. I'm so sorry to bother you like this. I didn't know who else to call. Michael sank into one of the balcony's plush teak chairs, the fine leather sighing under his weight. He sensed this was no casual catch-up. What's going on? Is everyone okay? A heavy, crackling pause filled the line, a void of unspoken words that stretched for an eternity. When Angela finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. It's about Grandma Dolores. At the mention of his mother's name, Michael sat bolt upright. Dolores Jordan, the bedrock of his life. At 93, she was frailer, yes, but her spirit remained as indomitable as ever. Fiercely independent, deeply religious, and possessed of a pride that was both her greatest strength and her most stubborn shield. She still lived in the modest but comfortable Charlotte home he'd bought for her and his father decades ago. The home where they'd hosted countless family gatherings. The home where his father, James, had lived out his final years. Is she okay? Michael asked, a sudden cold tightness gripping his chest. Did she fall? No, not that. It's Uncle Michael. She's been evicted. The words hung in the humid air, suspended like a basketball at the apex of its arc, before plummeting down, crashing through the carefully constructed peace of his life. Michael's grip tightened on his phone, the cool glass pressing into his palm. Evicted? What are you talking about? She owns her house. I paid off the mortgage 30 years ago. Angela's sigh was heavy with a sorrow that seemed too large for the phone line to contain. Not that house, Uncle Michael. She sold it about a year ago. She said it was too big for her. Too many memories of Grandpa. She moved into a senior living apartment, a really nice one. Highland Terrace. She wanted to be in a community, she said. She didn't tell you? The question was a quiet indictment. No, she hadn't told him. He'd sent flowers for her birthday, called on Christmas and Easter. He'd assumed she was fine, content in the home he'd provided. The realization that she had made such a life-altering decision without his knowledge was a fresh shock. Why am I just hearing about this now? Where is she staying? That's the thing, Uncle Michael. She made me promise not to tell you. You know how she is. All that pride. Angela's voice cracked. I've been helping where I can, bringing her meals. But I'm stretched thin with my own kids and work. She's at the Pinewood Motel, off Highway 49, with just a few suitcases. It's not good, Uncle Michael. It's really not good. The Pinewood Motel. Michael knew the type of place. One of those grim single-story establishments that charged by the week, where hope went to die slowly under the buzz of flickering fluorescent lights. The thought of his mother, his 93-year-old mother, in such a place, caused a physical pain in his chest, sharp and debilitating. How long? Michael managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper. 10 days now. The apartment building was sold to some big corporation. They raised the rent by almost triple, said they were doing luxury upgrades. Grandma's pension and Social Security couldn't cover it. She's applied for subsidized housing, but there's a 6-month waiting list. She won't let me tell anyone else in the family. She just keeps saying, we don't trouble Michael with these things. Michael stood up abruptly, the teak chair scraping violently across the stone floor. He strode back into his home office, a cavernous room filled with the gilded artifacts of his career. 6 NBA championship trophies gleamed in custom-lit cases. Framed jerseys, iconic photographs with presidents and popes, symbols of a life lived at the zenith of human achievement. Suddenly, it all felt hollow, obscene. His mother was living in a motel room while he was surrounded by monuments to his own success. Does she have food? Is she safe? Michael asked, his mind racing as he opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I bring her dinner every night, Angela assured him. But she's alone all day. She just sits in that little room reading her Bible. She pretends she's fine, but I can see it in her eyes. She's scared. Michael closed his eyes, a tidal wave of memories washing over him. Dolores, working extra shifts at the bank to buy him his first real pair of basketball shoes when their budget was stretched thin. Dolores, sitting through every one of his high school games, her cheers the loudest in the gym. Dolores, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into his hand when he left for college, money she couldn't spare but gave anyway, whispering, just in case, baby. Why didn't she call me? Michael asked again, though he already knew the answer. Angela's laugh was short and bitter. You're Michael Jordan. You live on a different planet. Do you think she wants to be the mother who couldn't manage? The one who needed a handout from her famous son? You know her. She'd rather suffer in silence than admit she needs help. No, it wasn't her way. Dolores had never traded on his fame, never asked for special treatment. When reporters had sought her out over the years, she'd politely declined, saying, Michael's accomplishments are his own. I'm just his mother, and I'm proud of the man he's become. Michael pulled up his calendar and began clearing the next few days, his actions swift and decisive. I'm heading to Charlotte tomorrow. First thing. Uncle Michael, she's going to be so mad, I told you. Real mad. Let her be mad. Michael's voice was firm, resolute as a game-winning free throw. I'd rather have her mad than in a motel. After hanging up, Michael sat motionless at his desk, the profound silence of his mansion pressing in on him. On the wall hung a cherished family portrait from 1982, taken just before the NBA draft, before Nike, before he became a global brand. His father James stood proud and smiling, his arm around Dolores. Michael was there, lanky and grinning, the future legend not yet fully formed. He'd made a promise to her once, hadn't he? A sweltering summer night after his first Nike contract, sitting on the porch of their parents' home. "You'll never have to worry about anything again, Mama. None of you will." She had just smiled that patient, knowing smile of hers and said, "I don't worry about money, Michael. I worry about you. I worry about you forgetting where you came from." Had he forgotten? Not intentionally. But life moved at a dizzying pace when you were at the center of a billion-dollar empire. Weeks bled into months. Phone calls, once daily, became weekly, then dwindled to holidays and birthdays. Visits were always soon, but soon rarely came. He sent lavish gifts, chartered private jets for family vacations, provided financially for everyone. But when was the last time he'd been truly present in his mother's life? When was the last time he had simply sat with her, not as Michael Jordan the icon, but as Michael the son, and listened? The realization settled like a stone in his stomach. His mother had been suffering in silence, her pride a fortress he had failed to breach, while he lived in insulated luxury less than 30 miles away. Michael picked up his phone again and dialed his personal assistant. "Emma, cancel everything for the next week," he instructed, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "And find out everything you can about a company called Highland Property Management, and another one, Pinnacle Development Group. Yes, Pinnacle. They own the apartments where my mother was living." "Yes, sir," came the efficient reply. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate his success had built, a kingdom that suddenly felt like a cage. "Family business," he said quietly. "And Emma, book me the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Charlotte for tomorrow night." He paused. "Actually, make that 2 connecting presidential suites." After hanging up, Michael walked over to a bookshelf and took down a well-worn photo album. He opened it to a picture of him as a boy, no older than 10, standing beside his mother. She was kneeling, tying his shoe, her head bent in concentration, her hands gentle and sure. He remembered that day. He'd been terrified before his first ever organized basketball game. She had knelt just like that and said, "Don't you worry about winning or losing. You just go out there and be the good boy I raised. The rest will take care of itself." Michael Jordan, 6-time NBA champion, billionaire businessman, global icon, sat alone in his vast, silent home, staring at a faded photograph, wondering how he had failed to notice his own mother, the anchor of his entire world, had come untied from her moorings. The weight of that realization left him in a silence so profound that all he could hear was the echo of a promise made long ago, and the quiet, insistent question of whether it was too late to make it right. Sleep was an impossibility. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. as Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind a relentless torrent of guilt and memory. He got up, pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, and padded barefoot down the grand, curving staircase to his trophy room. The cavernous space was dark, save for the soft, ethereal glow of the spotlights on his 6 NBA championship trophies. Tonight, their golden gleam seemed to mock him. He walked past them without a glance, heading instead to a simple, unadorned wooden cabinet in the corner. Inside was a collection of photo albums, meticulously curated by his mother over the years. He hadn't looked at them in ages. He pulled one out, its cover worn smooth, and sat in a deep leather armchair. The first photo showed the modest house on Gordon Road in Wilmington where they'd grown up. It wasn't much, but it had been a home filled with love, discipline, and the constant, comforting presence of his parents. His father, James, had worked at the General Electric plant, and his mother, Dolores, had been a teller at the United Carolina Bank. They weren't poor, but there was never money to waste. "We had everything we needed," his mother used to say, "and the love we had was worth more than any fortune." He turned the page and a lump formed in his throat. A 10-year-old Michael stood proudly holding a new basketball, a Christmas gift. Beside him, Dolores, then in her late 40s, had her arm around his shoulder, her smile a beacon of maternal pride. "You were born to fly, Michael," she had told him once. After he'd spent an entire afternoon trying and failing to dunk on the hoop his father had nailed to a pine tree in the backyard. But even eagles need a nest to come home to. Don't you ever forget that. The memories came flooding back, each one a fresh indictment of his neglect. It was after he'd been famously cut from the Laney High School varsity basketball team as a sophomore. He'd come home devastated, locked himself in his room, and cried with the hot, bitter tears of teenage humiliation. Dolores hadn't banged on the door or demanded he come out. She had simply sat on the floor outside, her back against the door, and waited. After an hour of silence, she had slipped a plate of his favorite peanut butter cookies under the door. Later, when he finally emerged, red-eyed and sullen, she had simply hugged him and said, "This just means you've got more to prove. And proving people wrong is what Jordans do best." He turned more pages, a visual history of her unwavering support. Dolores at his high school graduation, her applause the loudest in the auditorium. Dolores driving 4 hours after a full shift at the bank to watch him play for the North Carolina Tar Heels, arriving just before tip-off, her tired face breaking into a radiant smile the moment she saw him on the court. Dolores, standing quietly in the background the day he signed his first Nike contract, a moment that would change the landscape of sports marketing forever. While others celebrated the staggering numbers $2.5 million over 5 years, a fortune at the time, she had simply squeezed his hand and whispered, "Be a good man first, Michael. The rest is just noise." That night, they'd sat on the porch of the new house he'd just bought for his parents, the first major purchase of his NBA career. The cicadas sang their nightly chorus in the warm North Carolina air, and Michael, flush with the intoxicating power of his newfound wealth, had made her a promise. "You'll never have to worry about money again, Mama. None of you will." She'd looked at him with those steady, all-seeing eyes and said something he'd never forgotten. "I don't worry about money, Michael. I worry about you forgetting who you are and where you came from. Fame is a heavy coat. Don't let it smother the boy I raised." Had he let it? Not intentionally. But his career had exploded with the force of a supernova. 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls, Olympic gold medals, global fame that transcended sports. The years had become a blur of games, endorsements, and business deals. He'd made sure his parents were taken care of, buying them houses, cars, whatever they needed. But he had outsourced the care, substituting financial provision for personal presence. He turned to another page in the album, a photo from Christmas 1996. He'd flown the whole family to Chicago. There was Dolores, holding his first daughter, Jasmine, her face a mask of pure grandmotherly joy. When was the last time he'd seen that look on her face, directed at him? 3 years ago, at a family reunion? No, it had been longer. Last Thanksgiving, he'd hosted everyone at his estate, but a crisis with the Hornets had consumed him. He'd spent most of the day on the phone, delegating, problem-solving, being the CEO. Had he even had a real conversation with his mother that day? He couldn't remember. The shame was a physical weight. He closed the album and checked his watch. Almost 4 a.m. In a few hours, he would drive to Charlotte to find his mother. He packed a small overnight bag, choosing simple, unadorned clothes jeans, a plain black polo shirt. Dolores had always teased him when he got to Hollywood, as she called it. Today, he needed to be just Mike, her son, not Michael Jordan, the superstar. As dawn streaked the sky over Lake Norman, Michael got into his car, no one of his flashy Ferraris or Bentleys, but a discreet black SUV with tinted windows. The 30-minute drive to Charlotte felt like a journey across a lifetime. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would apologize, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. As he neared Charlotte, he thought about his mother's hands, strong, capable hands that had bandaged his scraped knees, cooked thousands of family meals, and worked tirelessly at a bank for over 30 years. The last time he'd held her hand, he'd noticed the skin was thin as parchment, the veins prominent. He had registered it with a fleeting pang of sadness, then moved on to the next thing. Now, the image of her frail hands haunted him. He pulled off the highway at exit 33 and followed the directions to the Pinewood Motel. The neighborhood had seen better days. Fast food restaurants with faded signs, a pawn shop advertising quick cash in lurid neon. The motel itself was a long, single-story building, with peeling yellow paint and doors that faced the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. He parked his SUV at the far end, hidden behind a large dumpster, and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Room 118, Angela had said. He looked down at his own hands, gripping the steering wheel. They were trembling slightly. The greatest basketball player of all time, a man who had faced down the fiercest competitors in NBA history without a flicker of fear, who had hit championship-winning shots with the world watching, was terrified of facing his 93-year-old mother. Michael stepped out of his car into the warm, humid morning air. A young man was sweeping the walkway in front of the motel office, bobbing his head to music only he could hear. He glanced up as Michael approached, did a double take, and froze, his broom clattering to the ground. You're, the young man stammered. Michael just nodded, his face a grim mask. "Room 118. The young man pointed wordlessly toward the far end of the building. As Michael walked along the cracked concrete path, he could hear a television playing behind one of the doors, the tinny sound of a game show. In room 118, there was only silence. He stood in front of the door, his heart pounding as if he were about to step onto the court for Game 7 of the NBA Finals. He raised his fist and knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. For a long moment, nothing. Then, the sound of a chain being unlatched. The door opened a crack, and Michael saw his mother's face for the first time in months. Dolores's eyes, still sharp and intelligent behind her glasses, widened in shock, then narrowed in a flash of pained understanding. "Angela called you," she said, her voice flat, devoid of surprise. It wasn't a question. Michael nodded, unable to find the words he had rehearsed. Dolores sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. She opened the door wider. "You'd better come in," she said, her voice laced with the unyielding pride that had defined her life. "But I don't need your help, Michael. We're doing just fine on our own." As Michael stepped across the threshold into the small, stuffy motel room, where his proud, independent mother had been living in secret shame, he knew that nothing could be further from the truth. And he also knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that convincing her to accept his help would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Some victories were harder to win than championships. This one would take everything he had. The motel room was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of stale air and disinfectant. 2 double beds with thin, faded floral bedspreads took up most of the space. A mini-fridge hummed loudly in the corner, next to a microwave perched on a wobbly table. On one of the beds, a small, neat stack of Bookshire Bible, a book of daily devotionals, and a well-worn paperback novelette next to a pair of folded reading glasses. A single suitcase lay open on the floor, its contents carefully, meticulously arranged. It was a scene of desperate order in the midst of chaos. Dolores stood with her arms crossed, a defensive posture he knew all too well. She wore simple slacks and a plain blue blouse. At 93, she was stooped and frail, the vibrant woman from his memories now a fragile echo. But her eyes, magnified by her glasses, were the same, determined, intelligent, and fiercely, heartbreakingly proud. "Where did Angela say she was going?" Dolores asked, her tone making it clear she was more upset about her granddaughter's perceived betrayal than her own predicament. "She didn't. She was just worried about you, Mama." "We all are," Michael said, his voice softer than he intended. He gestured to the room's single, grimy armchair. "Can I sit?" "It's a free country," she replied, though she remained standing, a silent assertion of control in a situation where she had none. Michael sat, the chair's springs groaning in protest. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations and years of neglect. "How long were you planning to stay here without telling me?" he finally asked. Dolores's jaw tightened. "As long as it took. I'm on a list for a new apartment. I'm managing." "Managing?" Michael looked around the cramped, dim room. The threadbare carpet, the water stain on the ceiling, the thin, institutional towels folded on the bathroom sink. "Mama, this isn't managing. This is—" "Don't," she cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare stand in judgment of my situation when you haven't been around to see what led to it." The words stung, A perfectly aimed shot to his conscience. Because they were true. He hadn't been around. He'd been in boardrooms, on golf courses, on private jets. He'd been living in a world so far removed from this grim reality that it might as well have been another galaxy. "I'm not judging," he said softly. "I'm here to help." "I don't need your help," she retorted the words, a reflexive shield she'd been holding up for years. Michael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, trying to bridge the chasm between them. "Mama, you're 93 years old. You're living in a motel room. Your granddaughter is bringing you food because you don't have a kitchen. How is that not needing help?" Her eyes flashed with the fire he remembered from his childhood, the fire that had fueled his own competitive drive. "My mind is still sharp, Michael. I can still take care of myself. This is a temporary setback, a test from the Lord." "What happened, Mama? Tell me what happened," he pleaded. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on a spot on the far wall. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat and weary. "The apartment building was sold. Highland Terrace. Some big company from out of state, Pinnacle Development. They sent a letter, said they were upgrading the community. Next thing I know, the rent is going from $800 a month to $2,200. My pension, your father's Social Security, it wasn't enough." Not even close. She gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Upgrading the community. That's what they call it when they push out old folks who've lived somewhere for years." "Why didn't you call me?" he asked again, the question a painful refrain. "And say what?" she challenged, her voice cracking for the first time. "Hello, Michael. It's your mother. I failed. I couldn't manage my own affairs. I need you to bail me out. Is that the call you wanted?" "You didn't fail," he insisted, his own voice rising. "A predatory company tripled your rent. That's not failure, that's criminal." "It feels like failure," she whispered, finally sinking onto the edge of the other bed. She looked small and defeated, and it broke his heart. "I promised your father I would never be a burden to any of you children. I promised him I would always stand on my own 2 feet." A knock at the door made them both jump. Dolores composed herself instantly, her mask of pride slipping back into place. "That'll be Angela with my lunch," she said, moving to the door. But it wasn't Angela. It was a young woman, a motel housekeeper, holding a stack of clean but worn towels. She froze when she saw Michael, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. "You're Michael Jordan." Michael just nodded, a polite but distant acknowledgement. The young woman looked from the global icon to the elderly woman living in the modest room, and a look of dawning comprehension crossed her face. She handed the towels to Dolores and scurried away without another word. Dolores closed the door, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Now the whole world will know," she muttered. "Mama, let's go," Michael said, standing up. "We're getting out of here. I've booked you a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. We can figure out the next steps from there." She shook her head, her stubbornness returning. I'm not going to be the poor mother staying in a fancy hotel on her rich son's dime. That's not who I am." "Who said anything about a poor mother?" Michael countered, his frustration mounting. "You're my mother. You deserve to be comfortable and safe. That's all this is about. So you just swoop in with your millions and solve everything?" Her voice was quiet but intense, each word carefully chosen. "That's always been your solution, hasn't it, Michael? Throw money at a problem and expect it to go away." The accusation hung in the air between them. He wanted to deny it, to argue, but he couldn't, because she was right. For years, that had been his solution. A new car for his brother, a down payment on a house for his sister, a foundation check for a charity. It was easier than giving his time, his attention, his presence. "When was the last time you came to visit just to visit?" she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Not for a holiday, not for a funeral. When was the last time you called just to ask how my day was? Do you even know the name of my doctor? Do you know that my arthritis has been acting up something fierce this past year?" He couldn't answer. He didn't know. The silence was his confession. "I'll figure something out," he said after a long, painful moment. "Something that works for you." "There's nothing to figure out," Dolores said, rising from the bed, her back straight as a soldier's. "I appreciate you coming, Michael. but I'll be fine on my own, I always have been. He watched helplessly as she began to tidy the already tidy room, straightening the bedspread, adjusting the books on the nightstand, small acts of defiance, of reclaiming control. He knew he couldn't push her any further today. It would only make her retreat deeper into her pride. "Okay, Mama," he said softly. "I'll go. For now. But this isn't over." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. "If you want me to help," he said, trying a different tack, "then give me something to do. You mentioned the community. What happened there? What about the other people in your building?" For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger crossed her face. "They forced everyone out," she said, her voice softening with concern for others. "Mrs. Gable from 2B, she's 89, had to move in with her daughter in another state. Mr. Henderson, a veteran, he's in a place much worse than this. They scattered us. They broke up our community." Michael nodded slowly. It was a start, an opening. "I'll look into it," he promised. As he stepped out of the dim motel room and back into the bright Carolina sun, he felt a profound sense of failure, but also a flicker of something else: purpose. This wasn't just about money or finding his mother a new apartment. It was about respect, dignity, and reconnecting with the woman who had given him everything. He got back into his SUV and called his assistant. "Emma, I need you to find out everything you can about the evictions at Highland Terrace Apartments," he said, his voice hard as steel. "And I want a full dossier on Pinnacle Development Group, their board members, their other properties, their investors, everything." He was no longer just a son trying to help his mother. He was Michael Jordan, and he was about to remind a few people what happened when you messed with his family. This was a new game, with higher stakes than any championship. And it was a game he had no intention of losing. Michael drove through the gleaming glass and steel canyons of uptown Charlotte, a city he had adopted as his own, the home of his NBA team. Yet, as he looked at the soaring office towers and luxury condos, he realized he knew nothing of the other Charlotte, the one where his own mother had been struggling, where elderly residents were being pushed out of their homes. He pulled his SUV into the private parking garage beneath the towering Bank of America corporate center, where his business headquarters occupied the top 2 floors. The security guard in the lobby, a man who had worked there for years, greeted him with a familiar nod. "Afternoon, Mr. Jordan. Didn't expect to see you in the office today." Michael offered a tight, distracted smile as he strode to the private elevator. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, guilt, and a burgeoning, cold resolve. The elevator doors opened directly into the hushed, opulent suite of his private office. Thomas Reynolds, his longtime financial advisor and confidant, was already waiting, a look of concern on his sharp, intelligent face. "Emma said it was urgent," Thomas said, rising from his seat, tall, impeccably dressed, with a calm demeanor that had soothed Michael through countless market fluctuations and business crises. Thomas was one of the few people who could speak to him with complete candor. "It is," Michael replied, dropping into the large leather chair behind his massive mahogany desk. The chair felt alien, the trappings of his success a bitter irony. "My mother has been evicted." The color drained from Thomas's face. He sat down slowly, his professional composure momentarily shattered. "What? Dolores? How is that even possible? I oversee her accounts. She has a healthy portfolio, more than enough." "She sold the house I bought her," Michael interrupted, the words tasting like ash. "A year ago. Moved into a senior apartment complex. She never told me. The new owners tripled the rent. She's been living in a motel for 10 days. Thomas stared at him, speechless. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. "Michael, I'm so sorry," he finally managed. "Why are we just hearing about this now?" The question echoed Michael's own tormented thoughts. "Because I haven't been paying attention," he said, the admission raw and painful. "I've been a lousy son." He pushed aside the guilt, focusing on the problem at hand. "I need you to find out everything about this situation. The apartment complex was Highland Terrace. The company is Pinnacle Development Group." Thomas was already typing furiously on his tablet, his mind shifting into its familiar problem-solving mode. Pinnacle. Yes, I know them. An aggressive real estate investment trust out of New York. They've been buying up properties all over the Southeast, particularly in gentrifying neighborhoods. They have a reputation for being ruthless. I want to know who's on their board, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. I want to know who their major investors are. I want to know everything. Consider it done, Thomas said. And what about Dolores? We can have her in a 5-star hotel within the hour. We can buy her a new condo by the end of the day. She refused, Michael said, rubbing his temples. Pride. She won't take a handout. He paused, remembering the one opening she had given him. She mentioned the other residents who were forced out. She was worried about them. She also mentioned a community center nearby that she used to volunteer at. She said it closed down recently. Thomas's fingers flew across the screen again. That would be the West Side Community Center. It lost its city funding about 6 months ago. There was a small piece about it in the Observer. Budget cuts. Get me everything on that too, Michael instructed. City council meeting, minutes, budget reports, news articles, everything. As Thomas left to marshal their team of lawyers and researchers, Michael swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. The panoramic view of the city, a view that had once filled him with a sense of accomplishment, now seemed to mock him. He was the king of this city, yet he had been blind to the suffering happening just a few miles away. He typed Westside Community Center Charlotte into his search engine. The results showed a modest, single-story brick building with a basketball court, a small playground, and what looked like classroom spaces. He found archived photos of community events, children learning to read, seniors participating in exercise classes, families gathered for holiday meals. And there, in a photo from 2 years ago, was his mother. She was standing with a group of teenagers, all of them wearing T-shirts that read, Westside Reads. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile of purpose. He clicked through the center's old, defunct website. Under the Volunteers tab, he found a short bio of his mother. Dolores Jordan has been a dedicated volunteer at our center for over 15 years, running our flagship literacy program for at-risk youth. Her passion and commitment have changed the lives of hundreds of children in our community. A fresh wave of shame washed over him. This was his mother's life, her passion, not living off his fame, but quietly, diligently serving her community. And he hadn't even known. An hour later, Thomas returned, his face grim. He carried a thick file folder. I've got some preliminary information, he said, spreading papers across Michael's desk. And you're not going to like it. Let's hear it. The community center was one of 5 that lost funding in the last budget cycle, Thomas began. The city council voted 4-3 to redirect the funds to a new downtown sports complex, a pet project of a few influential developers. He slid a document across the desk. Interestingly, 3 of the council members who voted for the cut received substantial campaign donations from Pinnacle Development Group. Michael's eyes narrowed. Why would a real estate company care about closing a community center? Because centers like that anchor working-class neighborhoods, Thomas explained, his voice grim. They provide services that help keep families in place. They foster a sense of community. When you take that away, the neighborhood destabilizes. Michael finished, the predatory logic becoming clear. Property values stagnate or fall. It becomes easier to buy up buildings, force out long-term residents, and revitalize the area for a wealthier clientele. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. As for Highland Terrace, Pinnacle bought the complex 6 months ago. They've raised rents across the board by an average of 250%. Over half the original residents, mostly seniors on fixed incomes, have already been forced to leave. Michael felt a cold fury building inside him. This wasn't just bad luck or market forces. This was a calculated, predatory strategy. And his mother had been one of its victims. He thought of the CEO of Pinnacle, a name he'd seen on a charity event guest list, Richard Harmon. Get me a meeting with Harmon, Michael said. Today. Thomas looked dubious. Michael, a guy like that is booked weeks, maybe months, in advance, even for you. Today is a long shot. A humorless smile touched Michael's lips. Call his office. Tell his assistant that Michael Jordan is interested in becoming a major investor in Pinnacle Development. I guarantee he'll find the time. Thomas's eyebrows shot up in admiration. Using your name as bait. Smart. Sometimes you have to use the tools you've got, Michael replied. While Thomas made the call, Michael reviewed the rest of the information. The Westside Community Center had served over 200 children and 100 seniors. It had provided after-school tutoring, meals for low-income families, and a safe place for kids to go while their parents worked. Its closure had left a gaping hole in the fabric of the neighborhood. You have a meeting with Richard Harmon at 4:30, Thomas announced, returning to the office. At his headquarters, he was, as you predicted, suddenly available. Good, Michael said, checking his watch. That gave him 2 hours. Now, I need one more thing. Name it. I want to visit the community center, the actual building. 20 minutes later, Michael pulled his SUV up to a one-story brick building with boarded-up windows and a chain-link fence surrounding the property. A large, faded "For Sale" sign was posted near the entrance. The basketball court he'd seen in the photos was visible around the side, its hoops removed, weeds sprouting through cracks in the pavement. It looked forlorn, abandoned. As he sat in his car, an elderly woman walked by, pushing a shopping cart filled with groceries. She paused, looking at the shuttered building with a deep sadness. Michael rolled down his window. "Excuse me, ma'am. Did you know this place?" The woman turned, squinting at him. "Know it? My grandchildren practically grew up here. That nice Mrs. Jordan, the basketball player's mother, she taught both of them to read right in that room there." The woman peered at him more closely, her eyes widening. "Say, aren't you?" "Thank you," Michael said quickly, rolling up the window before she could finish the question. He didn't want recognition. He wanted understanding. He drove slowly through the surrounding neighborhood. It was a community of small, older homes, some neatly kept, others showing signs of neglect. He saw "For Rent" signs in front of several houses, and a few that looked vacant. He could feel the change Thomas had described, the slow, insidious process of a community being hollowed out. He checked his watch. It was time to meet Richard Harmon. As he drove back toward the gleaming towers of Uptown, Michael felt a shift inside him. This was no longer just about his mother. It was about Mrs. Gable from 2B, Mr. Henderson, the veteran, and the grandchildren of the woman on the street. It was about a community being dismantled for profit. The gleaming glass tower that housed Pinnacle's offices was a world away from the Westside neighborhood. He was escorted immediately to Harmon's corner office on the 35th floor. Richard Harmon was exactly what Michael had expected. 50-ish, tanned, with perfectly coiffed hair and a suit that cost more than a year's rent at the old Highland Terrace. He rose from behind a vast, minimalist desk with a practiced, predatory smile. "Michael Jordan, this is an unexpected pleasure," Harmon oozed, extending a manicured hand. "I've long been an admirer. I was hoping we might find a way to work together." Michael shook his hand firmly, but didn't return the smile. He remained standing, a subtle power play. "I'm here about Highland Terrace Apartments and the Westside Community Center." Harmon's smile faltered, just for a second. "I wasn't aware you had interests in those properties." "My mother lived at Highland Terrace," Michael said, his voice flat and cold, "until your company raised her rent by 250%. Harmon's expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. "I see. Well, I'm truly sorry to hear that. But business is business. We've invested millions in upgrading these neglected neighborhoods. By forcing out the elderly and the poor," Michael stated, "we prefer to think of it as neighborhood revitalization." Harmon replied smoothly, recovering his composure. "Charlotte is a growing, dynamic city. These areas have been undervalued for years. It's simply the cycle of urban development. Some displacement is unfortunate, but necessary for progress." "And the community center?" Michael pressed. "Was closing that part of your revitalization plan too?" Harmon's eyes narrowed. "That was a city council decision. Pinnacle simply expressed its support for redirecting city resources to projects with a broader economic impact." "Broader economic impact," Michael repeated, the words tasting like poison. You mean projects that help you sell luxury condos where working families used to live? Mr. Jordan, Harmon said, leaning back in his chair, a hint of condescension in his tone. I understand your personal connection to this situation, but this is how the world works. I'm sure a savvy businessman like yourself can appreciate that. Michael stood up slowly, his 6'6" frame towering over Harmon's desk. He let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Sell me the community center building, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an ultimatum. Harmon blinked in surprise. What? And Highland Terrace Apartments. And the other 2 complexes you bought in that neighborhood. Michael leaned forward, placing his hands on the polished surface of the desk. Name your price. Harmon stared at him, for the first time looking genuinely unsettled. Those properties aren't for sale. We have a 5-year development plan. Everything has a price, Michael interrupted, and I can assure you, my price will be better than your 5-year plan. This is highly unusual, Harmon stammered. I'd need to consult my board. Michael turned to leave. You have 24 hours to give me a number, he said over his shoulder. After that, I'll be taking a very public interest in how Pinnacle Development and its friends on the city council do business in Charlotte. He paused at the door, turning back to deliver the final shot. And trust me, Richard, that's not the kind of attention you want. As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Michael felt a clarity he hadn't experienced since his playing days. He finally understood. He couldn't just give his mother money. That would only reinforce her feeling of being a burden. He had to give her back what had been taken from her: her community, her purpose, her dignity. He stepped out into the fading afternoon light, already dialing his lawyer on his phone. Drew, I need you to set up a new foundation today and prepare to acquire 4 properties. We're going into the community building business. His mother wouldn't accept a handout, but maybe, just maybe, she would accept a partnership. And Michael Jordan was about to make her an offer she couldn't refuse.